You can't even keep the heat on," Diane said, sliding the papers across the kitchen table, like she was returning something she'd borrowed and never wanted. "My son is wearing the same coat he had in grade 6. He's in high school, Owen. Do you understand that?" Owen Calloway did not reach for the papers. He sat with his hands wrapped around a mug that had gone cold an hour ago, looking at the envelope the way a man looks at something he has already made his peace with. In the next room, 15-year-old Nate was pretending to do homework. But the house was small, and the walls were thin. And they both knew he was hearing every word. "He has a coat," Owen said. "He has your coat. That you bought at Value Village when you were 22. It doesn't even zip properly anymore." Diane's voice had the particular edge of someone who had rehearsed at this. "I have been waiting, Owen. 3 years running the books for a man who fixes other people's furnaces in the middle of winter and can't fix his own. I used to think it was temporary. I kept telling myself you were building towards something. And then I stopped being able to see what that thing was." Owen's eyes moved, just for a second, toward the door that led to the basement. Old habit, he brought them back. "People build things at different speeds," he said. Diane made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "You talk like that. You always talk like that. Like everything's a proverb. Like patience is a plan." She pulled her cardigan tighter. "There's someone else. I want you to hear it from me. His name is Carter Voss. He developed those condos on Lake Shore. You've seen them, the ones with the rooftop. He's a real person in this city, Owen. He does real things in the world. And he makes me feel like I'm going somewhere." Owen knew the name. He'd known it for 6 weeks, roughly, the way you know a season is changing before it actually turns. Carter Voss, a man whose picture appeared in the Edmonton Journal with some regularity. Always smiling, always. Beside something glass and new. Owen had sat across from men like Carter Voss in another life. Men who believed that their confidence was the same thing as their competence and were often right long enough to do real damage. He said, "None of this." "All right," he said. Diane stared at him. "All right, that's it. As soon, what would you like me to say?" He stood there a moment longer, and Owen could see, underneath the resolve, something that was not quite triumph. Something closer to unease. As though she had been hoping the fight would justify the leaving, and he was refusing to give it to her. He left that night with 2 bags and a box of books. Nate stood in the hallway in his socked feet and watched her go, and did not say anything, which was somehow worse than crying. The week that followed arrived with its teeth out. The property management company that had been renting Owen's van on a subcontract, 12 years, reliable as the cold, called to say they were restructuring. The contract was being consolidated internally. Nothing personal. Owen thanked the man, hung up, and stood in the kitchen for a long time. He had the money. Not in the coffee tin above the fridge, not in the checking account that Diane had watched so carefully for so many years, but he had it. Had it the way a man has a coat he's packed in a cedar trunk because the season doesn't call for it yet. He could have called one number and made the van situation disappear. He could have made all of it disappear. The van, the lease, the heating bill, that had been circled in red on the counter for a month. He didn't. He called the agency and picked up 2 extra furnace jobs for the week instead. Date came down on a Thursday evening. and found Owen at the kitchen table with a circuit board open in front of him, replacing a cracked igniter. With the particular patience of a man who knows exactly how long the job will take and isn't bothered by it. Set it down. Mom said you're never going to be anything, Nate said. He said it quietly, not cruelly, more like he was setting down something heavy he'd been carrying and wasn't sure where to put it. Owen set the igniter down. He looked at his son for a moment, the teenager who had his mother's jaw and Owen's habit of going very still when something mattered. "Come sit down," Owen said. Nate sat. "People say things when they're scared," Owen said. "Your mom is scared." Fear sounds like anger a lot of the time, sounds like certainty, even. But under it, it's still just fear. He turned the circuit board over in his hands. "I need you to hold on to something for me, though. Some things, once they're gone, don't come back the same. You understand that?" Nate didn't understand it fully. He was 15. He nodded anyway. Because his father's voice had dropped into the register, it only went to when something was true. 2 days later, Owen signed the papers. He did it at 5:30 in the morning, sitting in the same chair where he'd eaten breakfast with Nate for 11 years, using the pen he kept clipped to the furnace work orders. He didn't read the document. He knew what was in it. Diane came for her things on a Saturday. She moved through the house in the efficient way of someone who has already reframed the space in their mind as someone else's problem, and, when she was done, she paused at the front door. "You're really not going to fight for this," she said. It wasn't a question, quite. Owen was washing dishes at the sink. He didn't turn around. "There are things worth fighting for," he said. "And there are people who've already made their choice. You made yours." She stood in the doorway another few seconds. Then she left, and he heard the car pull away down the quiet street, and he turned off the tap, and the house was very quiet. That evening, after Nate had gone to bed, Owen sat alone at the table. In the dark. Outside, it was -17. Somewhere in the neighborhood, a dog was barking at something in the cold. His phone was on the table face down. At 12 minutes past 9, it rang. He turned it over. Vancouver number. Private. Line, the kind of number that only appears when someone has specifically chosen to let it appear. He had last seen it ring 14 months ago. He had hoped, in the quiet and unrealistic way of men who have made deliberate peace with a decision, that he would not see it again. "Set it down," he answered on the second ring. The voice belonged to the chief legal officer of Northgate Capital Group. A woman named Patricia, who spoke with the measured efficiency of someone who had been briefed and was getting through the brief. "The situation," she said, "was this. The Silverton acquisition. A $4, $2 billion energy infrastructure deal that Owen had architected 8 years ago and left suspended in a holding structure of his own design, was now in danger of collapse." He set it down. 3 parties were threatening to withdraw. The board had voted. The attorneys had reviewed every option. There was one path, and that path required Owen to step out from behind the blind trust that had been managing his stake and appear, in person, in the room. "You understand what we're asking," Patricia said. "Once you surface, it can't be undone. The trust structure collapses. Your name goes on the filing. People will know." Owen looked at the window. Outside, the neighbor's porch light was on, orange in the cold. From down the hall, He could hear the slow, even breathing of his son. "I understand," he said. Set the phone down. He sat in the dark a while longer. The apartment that a woman had walked out of, because the man inside it would never be anything. The table, where he'd helped Nate with his chemistry homework 3 nights ago. The circuit board that was still on the counter, job finished, ready to be returned. He rose, walked to the doorway of his son's room, and stood there looking at the shape of the boy in the dark. "Tomorrow," he said softly, to Nate, to the silent house, to an Edmonton morning that had no idea what was coming. "Tomorrow things change." Dad set it down. By the next morning, the financial news had a headline it couldn't attach a face to. A filing submitted through Northgate's legal counsel before sunrise had formalized what the trust documents had been carefully obscuring for 8 years. The principal owner of Northgate Capital Group, still named only as a signatory, still nothing more than a structure and a signature, was now confirmed as the wealthiest private individual in the province of Alberta. The number was not disputed. Reporters began working their sources and hitting the same sealed wall they always hit. The trust had been airtight because Owen had built it to be airtight. On Kellaway Crescent, the wealthiest man in Alberta made oatmeal. He woke Nate at the usual time. He drove him to school in the truck. No van anymore. But the truck ran fine, and he kissed the top of the boy's head and told him to pay attention in physics. And he watched until Nate disappeared through the double doors. To anyone who passed him on the sidewalk, he was what he had always appeared to be, a man in a worn Carhartt jacket, a man in a worn Carhartt jacket, somebody's furnace guy. Someone the city had no particular reason to notice. That had been the whole design. He had learned in a previous life that the most powerful position available to a man is the one no one is looking for. He had been named. He had not yet been found. There was a distance between those two things, and he intended to choose the hour it closed. In the weeks that followed, Diane's new life arranged itself into the shape she had chosen. He appeared in Carter Voss's orbit with the ease of someone who has been waiting at the edge of a room and finally been waved in. There were photographs, a fundraiser for the Children's Hospital, a mention in the lifestyle pages, a column about Edmonton's next generation of real estate. That she had a new address in one of Carter's own buildings, a unit with floor-to-ceiling windows and a heated parkade. The Kimpser. She came to collect the last of her things from the house on a Tuesday. She moved through the rooms like a person revisiting somewhere they're glad to have left, and Owen let her, because there was nothing in any of it worth contesting. Nobody in the city believed Owen would survive what Carter Voss was doing to him. Sian, because Carter was doing something, quietly and without fingerprints. A word to the property management company, us there were those who said it, and those who only suspected it, but the timing was not accidental. A conversation with the building owner who held the lease on Owen's shop space on 97th Avenue, and suddenly the renewal that had always gone through without discussion came back with new terms. Impossible ones. Doors that had been merely difficult became locked. Nate felt it from the outside. The way a teenager feels his family's shape changing, without understanding why. A kid at school had started calling him Handyman's kid, had said things about the house, about the truck, about what it meant that his mom had upgraded. Nate came home one afternoon with a scrape across his knuckles and would not explain it, and Owen washed the cuts at the kitchen sink without making him explain 'Cause Owen understood our moments a boy has to answer for himself. And the answering is not always wrong. Spoons, they said, you can't take care of me. Nate said, his voice low over the running water. They said, Mom figured it out before it was too late. Owen dried the boy's hand. What do you think? Nate thought about it, the way he thought about things that mattered to him, slowly, from the inside. I think the heat works, he finally said. You fixed it yourself. I did fix it. Though they're wrong. There are two kinds of people, Owen said, who measure a man. Who measure a man differently. One group counts what he has, the other counts what he'd lose everything to protect. You're going to know both kinds your whole life. Try to be the second. They said through all of it, Edmonton's financial community had been living under a particular kind of weather. The Northgate Capital Group had been at the center of the province's largest infrastructure deal in a decade. And nobody could find the man behind it. The blind trust had held perfectly. Analysts speculated about foreign capital, about a consortium of private investors, about a figure who might not exist at all. A legal fiction made up of shell entities and borrowed names. That Carter Voss had read these articles. Everyone in his world had read them. And like everyone in his world, he had felt a pleasant, detached curiosity about the mystery. The way people feel curious about a weather system on the other side of the country. He had no reason to draw any line between the faceless capital, Titan in the headlines, and the man whose wife he had taken. The furnace technician on Kelloway Crescent, who drove a scratched-up truck and apparently couldn't hold a lease. He set it down. The gala was held in the Fairmont Ballroom in late February when the city was at its coldest and its most formal, the kind of evening that existed so that money could see itself. Carter had a table at the front and arrived with Diane on his arm. And for 2 hours, everything was exactly as he intended. Men shook his hand with intention. Photographers knew his name. Diane stood beside him in a dark green dress and felt, for the first time in years, like she had placed a correct bet. Then something moved through the room. It started near the entrance. A shift in posture, a turning of heads, the particular silence that spreads when a space realizes it has entered by us. Been entered by something it wasn't prepared for. Diane noticed it in the faces around her before she could identify its source. Conversations shortened. Glasses stopped moving. Important people who made other important people wait, were rising from their chairs. A man had come in. He wore a dark suit, nothing showy, and he moved the way he always moved. Without hurry, without the performance of arrival, the kind of man who had spent enough time in rooms like this to have no more interest in how they worked. The president of the largest commercial bank in the province crossed the floor to meet him and shook his hand with both of his own. And the gesture said everything without a word. Diane's champagne flute stopped halfway to her lips. She knew the set of the shoulders before she let herself know the face. She knew the way the stillness moved with him through the room like the eye of something. The glass in her hand was trembling. I set it down. It was Owen. A podium had appeared at the front of the room, and the gala's host was saying something she couldn't hear, over the sound of her own heartbeat. And then Owen stepped to the microphone, and the room went the rest of the way quiet. For nearly 2 years, Owen said, and his voice filled the space without effort. The voice of a man who had never once needed volume to be heard. The people in this room have been asking who controls Northgate Capital, who designed the Silverton architecture, who's been sitting at the other end of every deal you thought you understood. Decidune, he let the room sit with that. Debbie, my name is Owen Calloway. I founded Northgate 12 years ago. I am its sole principal and majority stakeholder. And the acquisition that a good number of you have staked the next 18 months on is going to be decided by a conversation I'm having this week. The hall didn't erupt. It went quieter. If anything, the hush of several hundred people recalculating everything simultaneously, like a room full of clocks all resetting at once. Diane could not breathe. Her mind was doing something involuntary, throwing images up, faster than she could organize them. The basement door, he would never let her open. The calls he took in the truck, idling at the end of the driveway at odd hours. The men who had appeared twice over the years, quiet men, in expensive wool, who Owen always met outside and sent away before she could see their faces. And the cufflinks, the single pair of cufflinks she had found in the back of his sock drawer. Once. Heavy. Unmarked. Clearly not from a box store, that he had said were his father's. And she had believed, because it was easier than the question underneath. They set it down. She had filed papers on the controlling shareholder of the largest private capital group in Alberta. Set down. She had walked out on him because the coat he wore to the grocery store was getting old. Across the room, Carter Voss had gone the color of February ice. Dick 9. He set it down. His mind was moving through its own version of this moment, and what it was arriving at was not good. 18 months ago, Carter's development arm had closed a financing round through a series of institutional intermediaries. A chain of capital he had been, in retrospect, too comfortable not to trace fully. The lead investment had originated through a holding company whose parent company linked back to a blind trust, whose structure he now recognized from the financial filings that had been in the news for months. He had built his rooftop condos on Owen Calloway's money. He had leveraged himself to the horizon and beyond using the patient capital of the man whose wife he had taken. Reception. The reception became a different kind of event after that. The people who had not noticed Owen an hour ago now arranged themselves to be near him, and Owen moved through them with the courtesy of a man who finds none of it interesting, looking for Diane across the room once, and finding her and holding her gaze for one moment that contained nothing. Not triumph, not grief, just recognition, before turning back to a conversation with a bank president about something worth more than anything Carter Voss had ever built. It was Diane who came to him. She found him near the tall windows. At the far end of the room, the city spread out in white and amber below. You let me believe. Her voice was not steady. All that time, Owen, you let me think we were barely keeping it together. You let me watch Nate wear that coat.
I never lied to you,
Owen said. His tone was not unkind. That was the thing she had not been prepared for. There was no cruelty in it, no satisfaction, only the calm of a man who made a choice a long time ago and has stopped needing to defend it. You wanted me to be someone who fought and clawed, and measured himself by what he could put on a table. I had been that man. I knew the price of it. What did it cost you? She demanded. What could possibly have been worth hiding this? He looked at her for a long moment, and something moved behind his eyes. Old grief, built into the structure of his face, the way a scar becomes part of a person. More than I was ever going to pay again, he said. He stepped past her, into the crowd. What he didn't say, what he had said to no one, not since Nate was old enough to ask, and he deflected with careful half-answers, was the shape of what that cost had looked like. Before Nate, before Edmonton, before the Carhartt jacket, and the furnace jobs, and the house on Kellaway Crescent, Owen Callaway had been building Northgate in the way young, ambitious men build things, completely at the expense of everything that didn't serve it. And he had been with a woman then. Her name was Lily, Nate's mother. To tell us, no fun. She had loved Owen when he was ruthless and driven, and never home, had married him in the middle of his ascent. And the men he did business with, the kind who viewed relationships as variables and leverage points, had treated her accordingly. They had used her, reached her when they couldn't reach him, made her. And understand, in the way such men make people understand things, that she was an asset on someone's balance sheet, rather than a person with her own weight in the world. He had gotten sick while it was still happening, and even then the pressure hadn't stopped. And Owen had sat in a hospital, in Vancouver, holding her hand while she was still, breathing, and understood. With the total clarity available, only in moments of irreversible loss, that the thing he had built had become a machine that consumed the people he loved. He had walked away from Northgate the week after the funeral. He had taken his 4-month-old son to Edmonton. Far enough, anonymous enough. And he had set up the trust and begun running the company through proxies and blind structures, so that no thread, if pulled, would lead back to a boy growing up on a quiet crescent in a city that had no reason to look for him. He had met Diane as that man, the plain one, the patient one. He had hoped she had wanted that man. He had been wrong about that. The wrongness had cost him nothing. He hadn't already made arrangements to lose. In the days after the gala, the structure Carter Voss had built began to breathe differently. The institutional capital backing his development fund. Patient, accommodating, structured through layers he had never fully audited, began to move. Financing arrangements that had always renewed automatically came back with new riders. Then with questions, then with silence. A bank whose relationship manager had always returned his calls within the hour stopped returning them within the week. 2 anchor investors in his largest project quietly indicated they were reassessing their exposure. Carter was not being attacked. That was the thing he struggled to name. There was no hostile action, no lawsuit, no press campaign. There was simply a withdrawal. The hand that had been steadying everything from underneath had opened, and Carter Voss was discovering what he had actually built in its absence. He came to the Northgate offices on a Thursday. He got past the first layer of staff through a combination of aggression and surprise, and no further. Owen received him anyway. "You're ending me," Carter said. He had the look of a man who has recently discovered that confidence is not the same as position. Over her? You're going to take apart everything I built over a woman? It down. Owen regarded him from a chair he looked entirely comfortable in. "I'm withdrawing capital I was always entitled to withdraw," Owen said. "That's a legal process, Mr. Voss. Not a personal campaign." He set down the folder he'd been reviewing. "You pressured a property manager to break a legitimate lease on a small business. You had a conversation with a landlord about putting a 15-year-old boy out of his home. You did these things to a man you believed had no options.
Duh.
Because you enjoyed the certainty that he couldn't respond. Owen's voice stayed level throughout. That was the part that was hard to bear. I'm responding, he said. That's all this is. Dennis Carter's fund was placed in receivership within the month. The financial review that followed, found what such reviews tend to find when a man has been more concerned with the appearance of success than with the mechanics of it. He was investigated. The investigation ran its course. He left Edmonton eventually, and the columns that had called him visionary forgot him in the same way they had created him, efficiently and without sentiment. Diane, whose name had become attached to his in the way names attached to seasons, felt the ground shift with him. She had built her reinvention on proximity to rising things, and proximity works in both directions. He came to the house on Kellaway Crescent on a Thursday evening in March. The truck was in the driveway. The front walk had been shoveled, as it always was. She stood at the door she had lived behind for 9 years and knocked, which was strange. To knock at a door you used to simply open, Owen answered. He stood in the doorway in his work clothes, a dish towel over his shoulder. He looked the same as he had always looked. That was somehow the hardest thing. I made a mistake, she said. Owen, I made a serious mistake. Nate needs both of us. We were a family. We could. For him, for Nate, we could try to. I know you believe that, Owen said. His voice wasn't cold. That was the part she kept not being ready for, the absence of coldness, the flat and settled calm of a man who has finished grieving a thing. You didn't leave because you were afraid of being poor, he said. I could have understood that. Fear of poverty is a real thing, and I would never hold it against someone. He leaned against the doorframe. You left the moment you decided I was worth nothing. That's what I can't find my way back from, Diane. You looked at the man in this house and made a decision about what he was. That decision was made. I can't unsee it. Her face broke. That isn't fair, she said. No, Owen agreed. Almost none of this has been fair. Starting about 14 years back. He glanced past her at the car idling at the curb. Watch your tires on the way home. Road's still icy from this morning. He left. He went back inside. In the living room, Nate was on the couch. He'd heard. He didn't say anything, but when Owen sat down beside him, the boy leaned into his shoulder, and they sat there in the quiet house while the furnace Owen had fixed himself knocked softly through the vents. Carter's name became a kind of shorthand in the city's business community, this businessman. The too fast money, the man who didn't audit his sources. Her company, which had valued her for her connections, went quiet. When the connections became a liability, she was competent. She would rebuild, eventually, in a different register. But the version of herself she had constructed around the certainty that she had chosen correctly, that version was finished. The story, when it fully broke, was too good to stay in the business pages. It moved into the morning programs, the supper hour local news, the kind of sustained media curiosity that a city generates when something confirms everything it has ever believed about hidden depths and the folly of surface judgments. A man who had been fixing residential furnaces in Edmonton's River Valley neighborhoods, who had driven a truck with a cracked side mirror, whose son wore a coat 2 sizes too old. That man had been sitting on the controlling stake of a capital group whose assets touched half the institutional investment in the province. The contrast did the work no headline could. The photograph of Owen at the Fairmont in his dark suit, set against a photo someone dug up of him, unloading equipment from the truck on a service call. He hated it. That was the truth underneath all the coverage, and no one printed it, because it wasn't the story anyone wanted. He gave no interviews. He let Northgate's communications people manage the requests. He kept driving Nate to school himself through the first 2 weeks of attention and the small cluster of media outside the house. Thinned each morning, until one morning it wasn't there at all. What he did with the months that followed said more about him than any interview would have. He established a fund in Lily's name, a bursary for the children of tradespeople and working families in the Edmonton metro area, the kind of families who know the precise number of sick days they can take before the math stops working, whose children understand before they are old enough to choose it, that the world has assigned them a starting position. He did not put his own name on the fund. He put hers. The first bursaries were awarded before the announcement of the fund itself, which was the way he preferred it. Then he bought the block, the building where his shop space had been, the one Carter had quietly worked to take from him when on the market. As part of the receivership process, Owen bought it, and the building beside it, and the one at the end of the street. He did not raise a single rent. The businesses that had been there before the crisis remained. The families in the upper units stayed. Wally Drummond, the property manager, who had carried Carter's message to Owen's landlord and broken a 12-year business relationship in the process, found himself selling the building to the man he'd wronged and retiring on the proceeds. Owen had let him keep his dignity in the negotiation because Owen had stopped needing to win that kind of thing a long time ago. Diane tried, in the slow and honest way of someone who has finally measured the distance between where they thought they were and where they actually are. She did not ask for money. Owen noticed this, privately, without it changing anything between them. She asked for time with Nate, and Owen gave it. He gave it. Because Nate had called her mom for 15 years, and Owen was not going to be the man who added to a boy's losses out of spite. He had seen what spite did to families. He had buried a person in the middle of it. But the thing between Diane and Nate did not repair the way she needed it to. Nate was civil with her. He was sometimes kind. He made her tea when she visited, but the unguarded ease, the way he had once talked to her without editing himself, the way a teenager talks to a parent when they don't yet know they should be careful, was gone. It did not come back on any schedule she could predict or manage. He had heard her on the phone saying his father would never be anybody. Shut it down. He had watched her walk out to a waiting car without turning around to see where he was standing. Children recover from most things. They do not forget the moment. They learned exactly how their parents rank them. Diane learned to live inside that. It was a hard education, and an accurate one. He set it down a year past. Listen, Owen was not, by then, the secret billionaire or the vindicated husband, or the man the city had spent a season talking about. He had become something quieter than any of those things, a presence in the city that people pointed to when they wanted to make a point about something, though they disagreed about what the point was, and he let them disagree. He still drove Nate to school on the mornings. The boy didn't take the bus. He had a better truck now, but not a showy one. He walked his son to the doors and stood there until Nate disappeared inside, the same way he had always done. He said it on an afternoon in the following spring, late April. The snow finally finished, the city in the cautious green of a northern thaw. Owen stood at the edge of a parking lot, behind a recreation center, while Nate played pickup basketball with a group of kids from his grade. The boy had grown 2 inches over the winter. He laughed differently than he had a year ago, more easily, from somewhere lower in his chest. He was wearing new shoes, good ones. Owen had noticed that Nate still kept the old sneakers at the bottom of his closet, tucked behind the hockey gear. He hadn't asked about it, because he was fairly sure he already knew. A man drifted over and stood near him at the chain-link fence. Someone else's father, watching his own kid on the court. He glanced sideways at Owen, and something crossed his face. "Sorry," the man said. "Are you? I think I recognize you. You're the Northgate guy, aren't you? My brother-in-law works in commercial real estate. He's talked about." He gave a short, uncertain laugh. "What are you doing at a rec center parking lot?" Out on the court, Nate went up for a shot and turned in the air to find his father's eyes the instant it left his hand. Checking, the way kids check, to make sure the person who matters most is still there, still watching. Owen raised a hand. The ball went through. He turned to the man. Beside him, and something like a smile moved at the corner of his mouth. "I'm just a dad," he said, trying not to miss anything. The man started to say something else, but Owen had already turned back to the court, and after a moment, the man let it go. He set it down. On the blacktop, Nate was pointing at the net, promising the next one, calling for his father's attention. Owen called back that he was watching. That he was always watching. The afternoon light came down pale and clean over the parking lot, and the fence, and the man who had once been named in a headline and wanted in the end. Nothing more complicated than this. To be exactly where he was. In a city finally turning warm, watching his son play. The measure of a man is not what he kept hidden. It is what he chose to show up for, when no one was looking. I've thought about Owen a lot since I first heard a story like his. Not the gala moment. Not the headline. The kitchen table at 5:30 in the morning, signing papers with the same pen he used on furnace work orders. That image stays with me. Because that's not a dramatic moment. That's just a man deciding, quietly, who he is. What strikes me most is that Owen never stopped being decent, even when decency cost him everything visible. He watched his son wear a worn-out coat. He let a landlord threaten his home. He watched the woman he'd married walk out to a car that wasn't his. To a life that didn't include him, and he didn't collapse. He didn't perform suffering for anyone who might be watching. He just kept showing up. Fixed the furnace, drove Nate to school, sat at the table in the dark, and thought about what mattered. That's what I keep coming back to. Not the billions, the consistency. There's something in the way Owen moved through that period of his life that I think we mistake for passivity, but it wasn't. It was a kind of deep, practiced integrity, the kind that doesn't need an audience. He had made a decision about who he was going to be, and he held to it even when holding to it looked, from the outside, like failure. That takes something most of us haven't fully tested in ourselves. It takes the ability to know your own worth when everyone around you has stopped believing in it. And then there's the intelligence of it. Not just the financial architecture, though that was real, and it mattered, but the emotional intelligence. Owen understood something that Carter Voss never did. That power is most effective when it's invisible. That patience is not the same as weakness. That the person who doesn't need to win every small confrontation is the one who tends to determine the shape of the larger ones. He read people accurately. He read situations accurately. He didn't react. He responded on his own timeline, from a position of clarity rather than emotion. But the part that moves me most is what he built in Nate, because that was the real work. Every morning, every repaired piece of equipment, every quiet conversation at the kitchen sink, Owen was building something in that boy that money can't manufacture and scandal can't take away. A sense of what a person is actually worth. A template for how to carry yourself when the world tells you you're nothing. Nate held on to those old shoes. I keep thinking about that. He could have thrown them out. He didn't, because he understood, at 15, that the mending of them had meant something. That his father had shown him something in that act that no rooftop condo and no newspaper column ever could. I think about what I want to carry forward from a story like this. I want to be someone whose actions are consistent whether or not anyone is looking. I want to be smart enough to know the difference between short-term appearance and long-term reality. I want to be sturdy enough, in the way Owen was sturdy, to stay soft inside all of that. To keep caring, to keep showing up at the fence to watch the game. That, to me, is what it looks like to actually build something that lasts.